Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, The Nurse Narrative, where my goal is to help you guys learn more about travel nursing through my own personal experience, as well as to make the important connection between healthcare and our faith. I wanted to make this video for somebody who wants to start travel nursing but has completely no idea where to begin. If you want to know the difference between what a staff nurse is, what a travel nurse is, and a step-by-step process of how to become a travel nurse, then you should stick around for this video. So you've decided that travel nursing is something that you want to go ahead and do. Either you're looking into going into nursing school, you're already a nurse, or you're somewhere in between. You don't actually need to be a registered nurse in order to travel. You can be a respiratory therapist, a certified nursing assistant. So there's positions for all types of travel opportunities within healthcare. If you want to travel as a nurse, I don't know specifics about being an LPN, but being an RN, there's the two options of having your ADN, which is an associate's degree, or your BSN, which is a bachelor's degree. So whether you have an ADN or a BSN, there's something out there for you. Now the next thing you're going to want to have is experience. So a lot of times I'll get asked this question, can you be a travel nurse right out of nursing school? No. Your first year of nursing is how you actually learn what you're doing, how to feel comfortable in what you're doing. So typically 2 years is the minimum requirement in order for you to become a travel nurse. Some facilities will allow you to have a year and a half, and that's about where I started traveling, was a year and a half in. Looking back, it was a very, very steep learning curve, and it still is every day. You'll understand this like I did once you start doing it. If you guys are interested in hearing a separate video about how much experience I think you should have and what my reasonings are for that, you guys can comment below because I have a lot to say about that. So if you're in nursing school and you kind of already have this idea that you want to become a travel nurse one day, I would highly suggest your first job that you get is within the specialty that you want to start traveling in. Also, I would recommend working at a facility that's either a level 1 trauma center or a magnet facility, a teaching facility, just because getting your first travel position, especially depending on how much experience you have, you want to set yourself apart from other travelers because there are so many people that are going to be applying for these jobs. When the hospitals that you're applying to will see your resume, they'll see that you've had experience with higher acuity patients, with more complex cases. It gives them a good indication that you might be able to handle more considering where you've already worked. What's the difference between staff nursing and travel nursing? The main difference is when you're a staff nurse, you're hired by a hospital. So you're working for that hospital. When you're a travel nurse, you're hired by an agency. So you're working for that agency. There are hundreds and hundreds of agencies. So it's really up to you and what it is that you're desiring based on benefits and pay and reviews of that agency. Another thing to keep in mind is that certain agencies will have connections with certain hospitals where they can streamline the process of you getting hired, or they can offer competitive rates compared to other agencies based on their connection that they have with the hospital. So since you're an employee of the agency and not necessarily the hospital, if benefits are something that you're looking for, that is something that you're going to take into consideration when you're choosing your agency. If you want reimbursements or benefits or something like that, then you're going to want to make sure that your agency that you're working for offers those things for you. So with each agency, they have recruiters. So if there's hundreds of agencies, there are thousands of recruiters. Essentially, the recruiter is like the middleman between you and the hospital. So this recruiter is working for you. They're trying to help you to form a contract where you can work at their facility for a certain amount of time. So it's really up to you if you want to work with multiple agencies at once or if you just want to work with one at a time. I choose to work with multiple at a time typically when I'm looking for a new assignment, just because it broadens your options and offers you competitive rates when you're looking at hospitals to apply to. Something that is really important though, and I would suggest, is finding a recruiter that you actually feel comfortable with. You don't want to just set yourself up with a recruiter who is going to send you to just any hospital for the sake of it. You want to make sure that they're actually genuinely listening to you when you're saying this is a priority for me, and they're not just saying, yeah, just to get you to sign up for something. Thankfully, when I was in nursing school, I had a feeling that I wanted to do travel nursing at some point in the future. So I actually made a lot of connections while I was still in school with recruiters, and I kept in contact with them until I gained enough experience to actually start applying as a travel nurse. So shout out to Lexo. She actually is the first recruiter I worked with, and I'm working with her again now. And I genuinely do feel like she has my best interest in mind. She only sends me contracts that she knows I would actually be interested in, and she doesn't waste my time, which I appreciate. There are some websites that you can use. I think some of them are called like Blue Pipes, travelnursing.com. Personally, I haven't used any of these websites, but I did sign up for one of them just to see what it was like. And I made the mistake, rookie mistake, of putting my phone number into the website. If I could tell you anything when you were starting to become a travel nurse and you were looking for places to work, do not just put your number out there, because you will get non-stop phone calls. There were multiple days where I received a phone call like every 30 minutes all day while I was at work. It was just recruiters from different agencies just calling me about all of these assignments and all of these states that I was not interested in working. And it was so frustrating. So don't make the mistake of putting your phone number on one of those websites unless you are ready and willing to be receiving so many messages. Once you find your agency, you find your recruiter, there's really not that much that's required of you. In most of the stuff your recruiter walks you through, they'll help you. So if you're feeling super overwhelmed, really don't worry about it. It's once you get hired where you really have to do all of the real work. So how do you know which specialty that you start traveling in? Well, it's going to be based off your experience. So if you have been a nurse in telemetry or med-surg, you're going to travel in telemetry and med-surg. And that's why I was saying it's really important for you to decide what you want to do right out of nursing school if you know you want to travel pretty soon after. Because if you start working on a med-surg floor and you want to travel in the ICU, that's not going to happen. If you work as a telemetry nurse and you want to travel in the ED, you have to have experience with what you want to travel in, because you don't get training. When you are a travel nurse, you walk onto the floor and you're expected to be the top of the top because you know enough about your specialty that you can travel to different places and not need to be trained. They're not going to teach you how to be a nurse. They're not going to teach you anything aside from where things are in their unit and things that are known to their hospital that aren't known to other hospitals. And depending on your facility, you might not even get an orientation. So you want to make sure that you're already working in the specialty and you feel comfortable in that specialty prior to traveling, because that's where you're going to be traveling. So if you're having trouble knowing exactly where you fit in and which specialty you qualify to travel in, it shouldn't really be that difficult because you probably already know where you work. However, most agencies will require you to fill out what's called a skills checklist. So this checklist is something that you'll fill out prior to applying for a job, and it basically goes through every aspect of our job as a nurse. It can go through each med, it can go through each skill, and it'll say how comfortable are you with this skill. And be honest, because this determines where it is that you qualify to work as a traveler. And you want to make sure that everything that you're required to do, you've actually been trained to do, and that you feel confident in doing it. So once you fill out the skills checklist, you'll have a better idea of knowing where you can apply. The only other things you need to actually start applying is references and your resume. And honestly, I wouldn't really spend that much time on your resume making it look nice or anything like that, because all that's really going into that resume is like, what experience do you have? That's really all they care about. Make sure you mention on there if it, like I said, it is a level 1 trauma center or a magnet hospital. If you have any charge experience, preceptor experience, definitely add that in your resume. Most of the time, that travel agency is just going to input all of that information into their computer system anyway, so don't spend too much time to make the actual resume look very nice. I mean, you want to look presentable, but I wouldn't focus on that being your priority. Once you have your resume, you also want to make sure you have references. A lot of the times they just require 2 people, and they can be anything from a manager, a supervisor, or even just a charge nurse that has worked with you and can vouch for your work ethic. And now you have to figure out the most important part, which is what is most important to you? Because that's exactly what your recruiter is going to ask you. What are your non-negotiables and what really drives you when you're finding these assignments? And there are so many options for assignments. You just need to figure out what it is that is your number 1 priority when you're applying to places. Are you more focused on location? You want to travel in a specific city and you don't really mind as much if it's a big or a small hospital? Or are you more focused on pay and it doesn't really matter where you work as long as you're making X amount of dollars? Is it a shift preference? You want to make sure you work days and you're not working nights? Or are you flexible with working days or nights? Do you want to work 12-hour shifts or 8-hour shifts? You have to figure out if you're okay with certain things not really mattering as much, or if there's certain non-negotiables. So my non-negotiables are usually location. I have a general idea of where it is that I'd like to work. And then also day shift, non-negotiable. Once you find out what it is that is most important to you, you also have to find a start date that you'd like to apply for, because a lot of the positions that are open, they want to know exactly when it is that you can start. And some of them want you to start immediately. Some of them are looking for a month and a half, 2 months in advance. So your start date is usually on a Monday. So you have to pick a Monday, probably about 4 to 6 weeks out. When you start applying, that will be the start date that you're applying for. Sometimes this can be negotiated, but a lot of times they're looking for somebody to start on that exact date because they need help. So they want you to start as soon as they need you. So at this point, you have found out what is most important to you. You've let your recruiter know, I want to start looking for jobs in Seattle or Boston. We'll only work day shift, and I'm open to working in med-surg or telemetry because you've already had experience in telemetry. Then your recruiter will go and look for all the opportunities that fit within what it is that you're looking for. This is where it's important that hopefully you have a recruiter that you can trust, where they're not just gonna send in applications for a job without your permission. Really thirsty. I would say most recruiters wouldn't do this, but I've already had one of the recruiters that I worked with send out my application to a hospital without asking me first. And you don't want that. It makes them look bad, it makes you look bad, and it's just not a good look. And that's something that you can always just let them know, like, hey, just want to make sure you won't send in any applications without me agreeing to it first, and they'll say yes typically. So then your recruiter will send you information and pay packages about the hospitals that you have potential to apply to. From here is where it kind of is just a lot of research. You'll have a list of all these hospitals, which units, and you can research about the hospitals. I know there are some forums with other travelers to ask them about how they liked it and certain things like that. But once you figure it out, like, oh, this is a hospital I actually would like to work for, you can let your recruiter know which places you'd like to apply to. So you applied. You said, hey, these are 3 places that I'd really like to apply to, and one of them gets back to you. What does the interview process look like? How do you interview as a travel nurse? That's another thing. You guys can comment down below if you're interested about what my interview processes have been like as a travel nurse. But most of the time for me, it's just been a phone interview, if I even got an interview. I've had some jobs where I actually wasn't interviewed at all, and I was just hired based on what my agency let them know about my experience and my references. So that interview process is typically really quick. You'll get a phone call from a director or somebody and higher up who works for the hospital that you're applying to. I would just say to prepare for that by looking online at interview questions, or just being confident in what your skills are, but also knowing what questions you want to ask, because that's an opportunity for you to learn more about the unit and the hospital to know if it's actually an assignment that you're comfortable taking. After that phone call, you're going to want to call your recruiter, let them know how it went, and hopefully they can start talking to the hospital and negotiating a contract that hopefully you can end up signing and starting to work as a travel nurse. Make sure when you apply to a job, it's a place that you're actually interested in working in, because I've actually had an experience or 2 where I had 24 hours to make a decision of whether or not I was going to start a job that I got offered. So depending on when your start date is, you definitely want to know whether or not that's something that you're going to accept, or if you're not. It doesn't really look good if you're applying to all of these places and then not accepting the position. You did your phone interview, you let your recruiter know, and the next day you get an email that just says they accepted your offer. So you now have been hired. So I hope that weed whacker isn't loud. Oh my gosh. I waited until this weed whacker guy had finished, and now he's right outside again. I'm just gonna keep talking because my phone's gonna die soon. So the agency then works with the hospital to form some type of contract that basically says how long you'll be there, what the floating policy is like, what unit you'll be on, how much money you'll be making. And I highly suggest you negotiate with your recruiter about your contract and your pay, just so that it fits your needs. But once you sign that contract, the next thing you're going to be doing is kind of shifting from working with your recruiter to now you'll be working with a placement specialist, or they'll call it something different at different agencies. But essentially this person is usually someone who helps you get compliant to start working at the hospital. So you need to provide documentation. They're gonna ask you for almost everything you've ever kept documentation of. So this is where it comes in handy for you to keep everything in a folder. That's what I do. I did this on my first assignment and just put everything into a folder so that I don't have to look for everything in all these different places from all these different years. And it just makes it a lot more convenient for you, especially if you're applying through different agencies and you're switching from one to another. You have to provide all of this documentation every single time you go to a new agency. So that's another thing to keep in mind about if you're interested in switching different agencies. So I can go over a list of what you guys are required to upload just so you kind of can get an idea of what it is that you'll be required to submit in order to become compliant. But before we start to talk about that, I just wanted to say that if you're enjoying this video and if you're also enjoying the nice weed whacking in the background, if you could please like this video because it really helps to get my video out to more people who are interested in travel nursing, and it really helps me out as a new YouTuber. Please subscribe and comment if you're interested in seeing more content like this. And that is all. Essentially, for this list of documentation, you're gonna be required to show your education, your diplomas from high school, college, nursing school. Also going to want to show your nursing license documentation. This weed whacker is really getting to me. Can you not? Anyway, so nursing license. You have to prove that you're a nurse. Find documentation of that. Another thing, when you're looking to become a travel nurse, I would make sure that you start this process of finding agencies and finding a recruiter 2 to 3 months before you actually want to start traveling, especially because of the nursing license. Because if you want to get a license in a state that you don't currently work in, it could be as quick as 3 to 4 weeks, or if you're applying for somewhere like California, it could take as long as like 3 months or even longer. So just keep that in mind too. That processing time could be longer than you expect. So aside from your education, your diplomas, your nursing license, you also have to provide documentation of all of your certifications, your ACLS, BLS, NIH, PALS. You want to be able to show that you have completed these things. You also have to do a background check. You have to do tax documentation. So you have to prove where your tax home is, your permanent tax home. And then you have to fill out an I-9 where you'll tell one of your family members or friends to basically verify your identity. A lot of times you'll have to do a drug screen, a TB skin test, vaccinations for flu, MMR, varicella, hepatitis, etc. Sometimes they even require you to do titers, which was really annoying for me because it takes me multiple rounds of the vaccinations in order to have a high enough immunity to show up on my titer that I've gotten the vaccine. They'll also require you to do an N95 mask fitting, and all of this has to be done in 2 weeks. So it really is a lot of work, especially if you're still working at a previous assignment or if you haven't given yourself like time in between becoming a staff nurse and traveling. It really is a lot to get done, but don't panic that you're not gonna have enough time to figure it all out. And your placement specialist really does help you. They give you authorization forms to go and get all of this done. And you don't have to pay for at least those types of things. The company reimburses you for that. Lastly, the only other thing that they do require are testing competencies. So you'll have exams through your agency that basically just test like, hey, do you even know how to be a nurse?
Do this, I can do this. Is it hot in here, Mrs. Bob? Why is it so hot in here?
And at first that worried me and I was kind of panicking about them, but now that I've done enough of the competency exams about like just basic nursing skills, they're very basic and you'll be fine. The hardest part about it is the med math exam, and realistically if you have a calculator, you're fine. A lot of the time you just have to pass 85% or higher and you're good to go. And sometimes they'll give you multiple chances to pass depending on what the exam is. And typically that's it. So once you have those 2 weeks to become compliant and you finish everything, you then are basically just waiting for that email, the hospital to say, hey, we're ready for you, come in on this day. And depending on what Monday you start, about the weekend prior is when they'll say, hey, this is all your information. This is the color scrubs you need to wear, what time you need to be there, and whatever else you need to expect if you're gonna be taking a test or if you need to watch any modules prior or anything like that. And now you can start traveling. So if there's anything that I spoke about that you guys want more in-depth information about, or if there's any questions that you guys have, please add them in the comments, because I don't wanna just give information out about what it is that I think you guys want to know. I genuinely wanna know what it is that you'd like to hear. I really hope that you get the job if you're applying, or that you muster up the encouragement to actually start traveling if it's something that you've been thinking about doing, because it's one of the best decisions I've made, despite how difficult it's been at times. If you guys liked this video, you'll probably like another video that I've made about tips that I have for moving and packing as a travel nurse, and I'll add that link right up here for you guys. I don't know if it'll be here or here because I have to figure out how to add the link, but